Hello and welcome to another tutorial. This one is Introduction to Creating and Modifying a Light, Establishing and Animating a Camera. A lot of people that have been doing this tutorial based on what they see here, looks like you guys are more trying to replicate the exact scene that you have here. The scene has very little to do with what this assignment is. It's more about actually getting your camera animated and your light set up and then rendering out a video. So for what we see here, what is this? Oh, thank you for that, whatever that was. So it's first about putting in a light and adjusting the different settings of your light, and then setting up a camera and animating the camera and rendering an AVI or a QuickTime file. I'm not really picky on which file type you use. So what I did is I went into 3ds Max and I made a scene replicating what we saw there. So I'm just going to use this. Your scene doesn't have to be a bowl with apples and a jug. You can make whatever you want. I just want to see that you've created a light and you messed with the settings to get something you think looks nice, and you've animated a camera. So that's what we're going to do here. So first thing, under the Create tab, select the Lights icon. Under Object Type, select Omni. Place the cursor in the front viewport and click to create and position an Omni light. So let's go ahead and do that. So under Create, under Lights, Max is currently defaulting now to this photometric light system. Let's just go to the standard lights. We don't want to worry about these ones right now. And we'll go to Omni. I'll hit F to go into the front view, and I will just create my light somewhere above my objects. I'm going to do it off to the side a little bit just so my light is cast not directly over top of my objects. And let's see what it says to do next. In the perspective viewport, right click on the word perspective in the upper left hand corner and select Show Safe Frame from the menu. Using the zoom, pan, and arc rotate tools, I would rather use the shortcuts that I talked about a long time ago, which is Alt middle mouse click will do your arc rotate, just middle mouse click will do your pan, and Control and Alt and middle mouse click will do your zoom. You can use the different icons if you want to here, but I prefer that you stick with those shortcuts. They make things a lot faster. But anyway, locate at the lower right hand corner. Oh, it's telling you where these are. Oh, and just get something that looks nice visually, pleasant. But before I do that, I'm going to move my light here in a little bit so it's kind of above my objects, but off to the side here. So it then wants us to go to where it says perspective, click Show Safe Frames. That's Shift F if you want to know the shortcut for that. Now what you're going to see here is this is the actual view that we'll be rendering. So this gray area here, you don't see anything. This is your safe area. This is what will be rendered in your render settings, which we'll get to. So I'm going to select my bottle and my apples. I'm going to hit Z, which is going to zoom in on them, and I'm just going to try to pick something that looks pleasant to look at, I guess. And I don't really like that checkered floor, so I'll just get something a little lower that has the wallpaper in it. Okay, I got a weird tangent there. Alright, so that's going to be my view that I have, and currently if I hit render, a render that happens. And I've gone and set up different textures. So I've got one that I created for glass. I found a texture of an apple on the internet and put it on my apple. And I've got a wood texture here for the table, and then I created one for this bowl and for the wallpaper, and then that's a standard checker. So you don't have to get this fancy with it. I can actually see that I've got some ugly stuff going on here with my apple. Oh, that would be why. Let's get that out of there. Okay, now if I re-render this, I shouldn't have these big gouges in my apple. That looks better. Okay, so that is the settings that I currently have. So if I come back here to the tutorial, I've done this part. Let's go into the next part. Do a render and press F10 to access the render scene window and render the perspective viewport. I've already done that. I've rendered. But to do what it says there, if I hit F9, it's going to render, which I've already done. And if I hit F10, it's going to bring up my settings for rendering. And I'll just move those off to the side and go to the next page. With the Omni light and the scene selected, switch to the Modify tab. Under General Parameters, check Shadows on and choose Shadow Map from the drop-down list. Alright, so I need to select my light. So I'm just going to select by name here so I don't lose my composition. And I've only got one light in my scene. It's Omni light. So I'll hit OK. And now let's move this out of the way, since I guess we'll be coming back to that. I'll go to the Modify panel. I'll turn on Shadows. Shadow Map is selected here by default. Render the perspective viewport scene with the added shadows. So let's render that. F9. And now I've got shadows in my scene. Actually, it doesn't look too bad. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a clone of my render. And I'll do this. I'll come back to this just so we can see how things are changing. So the next part that I have here is under Intensity, Color, Attenuation, continue to modify the Omni light by adding a color to the light. Okay, so we'll add a color. The color that I'm going to add is a color that I typically use for sunlight, which the RGB value is 250, 250, 210. Now, granted, we won't have sunlight indoors here, but let's just do that. And if I render that, my scene should become a little more yellow, just slightly. So let's look at the previous render I had here and the new one, and you can see that it's become just a little bit more yellow. So I will clone that one as well. Minimize these and close that window. Okay, next thing it says to do under Decay Type, choose Inverse Square, check Show, and adjust the start numeric value to the desired level. Okay, under Decay Type, choose Inverse Square. Okay, so Decay Type, Inverse Square. Well, let's start with that. No need changing things until I see what I've done. Well, it's made everything darker. Let's see. Under Decay Type, choose Inverse Square, check Shell, and adjust the start new. Okay, so what we're doing here is I need to show. I don't want to lose my composition that I have here, so just for the time being I'm going to create a camera from view, so from the perspective view that I have here, just so I can come back to this. I'll be able to use this camera later, but I don't want to lose that view that I have. So what I've done is I've got my light, and right now I have this inverse square. So I want this start value to start pretty much with this touching the table. So we'll start with that. So if I do that, I can see where it starts to go through. If I come back to my camera by hitting C and render, it should be brighter than the last one that I rendered, and I didn't make a clone of it, so you can't really tell. But so what it should be doing is it should be getting brighter from this spot, and then as it gets away from the light it should get darker. That's why my background is a bit darker. Okay, so I'm fine with that. The next part, under near and far attenuation, check use and adjust their numeric values to the desired levels. So I'll explain that. So I still have the light selected. I'm going to close that for now. I don't typically use near attenuation, just because the way a light will typically work is a near attenuation means that if I go to the front view here, I can show you what it's doing. So if I check use, what it's saying is that I think far attenuation is the one I always use. So what this does is it gives me two values. It gives me a start and a stop. And what it says to me is this start area is 100% bright, as bright as this multiplier 1. So where this start value is, it's set to 1. Where the end value is, if I go to 50, I'm just changing the number here. So whatever is outside of this little bubble will be 0, means it doesn't get any light. So if I go to my camera now by hitting C and I render, my background should be really dark. It's getting no light on it. So my light is only coming from, only shining on the objects that are within that 50. So you can see I get this fall off that kind of happens. Not bad, but now I can't see any of my background. So what I want to do is I'll change this number to where it's shining on, say, just to where you can see it kind of clipping through the corner of the wall here. Let's see here. And so what this means is this area is going to be dark, but from here it's going to gradiate. Gradiate? Is that a word? I don't think it's a word. It's going to get darker as it gets away from this first line here. So I just want the darkest part of the room to be the very corner, so right here. So that'll be black, and then it'll get brighter and brighter as it gets to this point. So now if I look at my render, I should be able to see parts of my wall, and it's getting darker and darker as it gets away from the light. And then my foreground here is nice and bright. I actually kind of like the way that looks. It looks like this is lit in a like nighttime sort of lighting. So what I might do is just turn this up a bit more, just so I can see my walls just a little bit more. So I'll just turn this up to, right now it's at 100, do 200 and see where that gets me. It's a bit more than I'd like. Alright, try 150. And I'll go back to the camera. Now I should see my walls a bit more. That's a little brighter than I really wanted. Alright, let's change that again. I hit escape to stop the render. I'll just do 120. kind of like that. So I can still see my walls, but they're a lot darker than everything that's in the foreground. So that looks pretty good. So I've got my settings set there. Near attenuation is kind of doing the same. It's kind of the opposite though. What it's doing is anything before the start value will be not lit, and anything after the end value will be lit. So it's kind of a weird way to do a light. That's why I don't usually use this. Whatever's close to a light is going to be bright. It's kind of impossible for it to work the other way. So let's go back here, next page, render the scene. Okay, I've done that, and they've actually, I can see how their attenuation was set up to make just the corner dark. Let's go to the next part. Under shadow parameters, change the shadow to a subtle, cool, dark color. So they're using like a dark purple. So we'll go with dark purple and see how that gets us, which is going to make this room kind of eerie because I've got green in it. So that should be shadow parameters, color, and I'm going to do a dark blue. That should give us more of a nighttime feel. And they want the density to be changed to 0.7. So we'll do 0.7 or 0.7. Yeah. And render that. So this should make my shadows more of a blue color than, yeah. So my shadows should be more of a blue tint. You can't really see it here, but they'll have more of a blue to them. You can kind of see it here in the apples, what it's doing, but they're blue shadows, not black shadows, and that's sometimes nice for atmosphere. If the edge of the shadow is too blurry, increase the numeric value of size under shadow map parameters. Adjust according to taste. So size. So that's this number here. I typically put in 1024. And then it asks to bring the shadow tighter into the object. I can't read. Change the bias to 0.0. So if I do that and I hit render, we'll see kind of a dramatic change here. So now my shadows are a little more crisp than they were before. They're much more well defined than the old settings that I had. Let's see what's after that. Okay, so we're going to create a target camera, which I've already done by going to create cameras, create camera from view. So what it's telling you to do is, let me close this. If I go to create, I can come to cameras and I can create a target camera. If I do this from the top view, I would just click and drag my camera and its target, and I'd want my target to be you know, something relative to what I'm trying to look at. I've got a camera already set up and it already has a target, so I will just go to local and move it in between basically my two objects here, my bottle and my bowl of apples. And I'll just go in the other view and make sure this is kind of what I want to look at. So that's what I'm seeing there with my target. Okay. The camera's still selected, right click in the perspective viewport and make it active. Hold down the control key and type C key to align the camera position to that of the perspective view. So if I would have hit Control C, I could have made it look at whatever was in my perspective. I could have matched it up. I already did that by having my perspective set up and again create cameras. there's the Control-C, that's the shortcut for it. Typing the C key will switch the perspective viewport to the camera view. So I've already gone through that. With the camera selected, select Auto Key. The red indicates that the keyframes will be set automatically with every change made to the objects in the scene. Move the slider from 0 to 100. In the top viewport, move the camera to a new position. Keys will automatically be created at 0 and 100. Under Render, okay, we'll get there. So what this is saying to do is, if I go in the top view, I select my camera, I go to Auto Key, I go to frame 100, and all it wants me to do is basically move my camera a different way here. So 2 keys were just created. I can see them in red. Those are position keys. So if I click Go to Start here and I hit play, that's what my camera is going to do. So I'm fine with that. Actually, I'm going to go to frame 50, which is halfway, and I'm going to zoom this out just a little bit. That way, whenever my camera, I can also just zoom from here. Because whenever my pass was happening, it was cutting off my bottle and the edge of my apples there. So that looks a little better to me. And you can also, once you're in camera mode, mess with these settings. This one will dolly the camera in and out. It's kind of like zooming. Perspective, I don't really mess with that one too much. That's just if you want to add a lot of just mess with it. It's weird. Roll camera I'd stay away from because it ends up rotating your camera around. It looks kind of weird. So if you wanted a canted view of something. Field of view is more like zooming in and keeping the perspective the same. And then you have truck camera, which is like panning, and then orbit the camera. So those are the settings there. Now we need to render. So I hit F10 to get my render back up. I'm going to change my range to 0 to 100. I'll set the resolution to 320 by 240, and I'll render the sequence as an AVI or a QuickTime movie. And I think that is the end. So this is what assignment 1 is. So let's do this. I'm not going to render it real time because that's going to take a while, but I will post. Well, I'll post what mine looks like in a discussion for the homework. So I can either set an active time range based on whatever my setup is here. That's my active time range, 0 to 100. Or if I'm worried about, maybe I've messed with this time range to where I'm only showing 30 frames, I can go here and say I want it to be 0 to 100 frames. And then I'll change this to 320 by 240. Come down to Files, Render Output. Yeah, I'll save it there, that's fine. I'm going to do an AVI, and I will call this assignment, actually, week 4, assignment 1, render. And I'll click save. It's going to come up with settings. I'm just going to pick uncompressed because I don't want any compression. I'll click OK, and I want to make sure that my view is my camera so that I'm not accidentally rendering out the top view. And I'll click render, and that will start rendering out my entire video. And we're not going to watch this entire process because it's not going to be too exciting. But I will post in the discussion my video so you can see it.